What's up, everyone? I'm back again with another review, and this time I'm going to be reviewing Peacemaker, and I'm really excited for this. So let's get started without wasting any time. Now, first thing first, I have to say this show was an amazing show. I'll just move on to the next slide. Sorry. Oops. Yep, there it is. Yeah, like I said, over here, I had a total blast with the show, and I really mean it. Like this show just doesn't take itself seriously, and that's exactly what made this show great and gave me such a great time while I was watching the show. I don't regret watching the show at all. Like even though it's like Peacemaker, no one ever heard about Peacemaker. I mean, the way they set up the show, because I remember in the Suicide Squad movie where Peacemaker appeared, they actually killed him at the end of the movie. Well, it was Bloodsport, played by Idris Elba, who killed Peacemaker, who's played by John Cena. He got killed, but in a post-credit scene, they revealed that he actually died. So I was like a bit skeptical, like why did they like bring him back when he was clearly shot in the neck and he was supposed to be dead, but in a post-credit scene they show him alive, and then the whole like reason for that was to set up a show called Peacemaker. And then I was wondering to myself, is it really going to be worth it? It's like, I mean, he's not even that popular. I mean, like it was my first time hearing about Peacemaker. I mean, he might be more popular than I think. I don't know. Let me know how popular he actually is. But I just like, didn't know why did they, when he clearly died, why did they bring him back to life? And why are they even going to make a show on him? But now that I watch the show, I think they made it I think it was a really smart idea to make a show on him, even though he may not be such a household name yet. But I think it was a great decision that they made a show on him because the show was amazing. And just to add on to that, I have to say it really has to do with the interesting characters in the show that really made the show very interesting. The chemistry between each character is just amazing. I'm not just talking about Peacemaker, I'm also talking about Vigilante, who's right here. Then there's also John Economos, the Harcourt, and then there's also Adebayo and many other characters that made the show just an epic show, or just an exciting show in general. I think it was like it had to do a lot with Peacemaker as a character that made each character more interesting, because every time he appeared with other characters in on screen, that's when like the character actually became even more interesting. Probably it has to do with like Peacemaker's like sense of humor, or his way of like interacting, and the kind of jokes he throws on other characters, jokes and even insults he throws out on other characters. I think it just made it like even more interesting to watch. And two particular characters I think went well with Peacemaker were none other than Vigilante and his father, Peacemaker's father, who's known as the White Dragon. I'm going to first talk about Vigilante. I mean, what a character, what an interesting character he was, not just with Peacemaker, but as a character in general. Like the kind of like, like chemistry they have with each other, the kind of like way insults they have for each other. I think whenever they were on screen, I just really enjoyed the whole show even more, just because of like, these two characters being such great duos. I remember this particular scene where this butterfly named Goff captured both of them, and like like Vigilante gets unmasked for the first time, and in order to cover his secret identity, he starts making weird faces. And then you have Peacemaker on the other hand, who has to answer these questions asked by Goff. Otherwise, he's going to cut off Vigilante's toe. It was just hilarious to watch that whole scene. So therefore, I really loved these two characters the most when they were together on screen. Now, moving on to his father, his chemistry with his father is completely different for sure, because the way they have conversations with each other shows how unstable their relationship truly is, and it also makes sense given that back as a kid, Peacemaker had actually accidentally murdered his brother, and that's why his father also hated him for that reason, and it makes sense. And honestly speaking, if there's any scene that was like super emotional, despite the show being a comedy show, or like the show being like being a comedy for most of the part at least, was this scene where like Peacemaker gets all emotional for killing his brother. Because I remember that scene where he was drinking whilst like sobbing about the fact that he killed his brother, and there's like this like song being played all of that together just made the whole scene emotional, despite the show being, hilarious for most of the part. So there's that. Now, I wanted to dive into his father a bit more. I mean, I'm just going to say this. I mean, you don't have to agree. Sorry, let me just move it a bit towards this side so that you can see my face much better. I think there's that light covering my face. Sorry about that. But anyways, like I was saying, it's like his father, I'm just going to say this, like there's nothing right, or there's nothing morally right, or like great about being the R word. And R word, I'm just not going to say the whole word out because I feel like I might not be allowed to say it. But the RACI, that word, the reason why I think it was great to see him as the R word character, simply because the way they portray him as that kind of character was quite interesting to me. Not, once again, I'll just say there's nothing right about it or good about it. I'm just saying the way they portray him as the R word was quite interesting in my opinion, such as how he had the flag upside down, calling the Asian police officer with slurs, and then how he gets hailed by the prison inmates for being the white dragon. All of that just made him an interesting character as the R word. But not to say that there's anything good about being the R word. So now moving on to the next point. I must have talked about how hilarious this show was, because this show is truly is hilarious. Like the sense of humor of the show is just on point in my opinion. For example, the intro scene where like all the characters are dancing to that song. It's like that. Do you want to taste it? I think it's a great song to use for the intro, and the way they have each character dance to that song, I think certainly sets up the tone of the show, because then that way makes the audience realize that this show is going to be a super duper humorous show, a hilarious show. And I think that way I feel like it was great. It was a great great intro scene, or like great opening scene for each episode. Speaking of each episode, I also like the way they create, like they come up with these creative titles for each episode. For example, a whole new world instead of a whole new world. I think it's like an interesting in a way, or it's supposed to be a pun, I guess. Or also the other title being something like "Cow or Never" instead of "Now or Never." I just found it to be creative. I wanted to also mention that as well. Now, moving on to the next point, I think I have to talk about this for sure. I mean, it is a comedy show for most of the part. It's also an action show, so I'm definitely going to talk about this. And I have to say, the action sequences of this show were just on point, slick, and satisfying in all the ways possible. I think at least for most of the part, like I enjoyed every single action scene. It was just well choreographed, well filmed. Basically, I liked it. I'm not just talking about Peacemaker. I'm also talking about Hardcore and Vigilante, especially when three of these characters were on screen. I felt like this show. I mean, like they just like killed it with their actions. They're like like whether it be with their fists or weapons. Like when it comes to action, like fighting, these three characters just killed it the most. And now, finally, moving on to the ending, I had to just say that this ending, in my opinion, I just found it to be a bit poetic or coincidental, which might be the better word to use rather than poetic, simply because I thought like it was interesting how both the villain of this show, the butterflies, and the hero Peacemaker had one thing in common, was that they both took a vow, such as for example, in the case of Peacemaker, he took a vow to make peace after he killed his brother. Whereas the butterflies, on the other hand, once they came to planet Earth, they made a vow to not harm the greater good, but just to take over human beings, so that they themselves can also like take advantage of the resources on the new planet they arrived on, because their previous planet got or their home planet got destroyed. And because they both had one thing had one thing in common, that is that they both took vows for different things, of course. But then like due to that reason, the butterflies really thought that they could bring Peacemaker into their world, or like they could make him part of him. But then hilariously, Peacemaker just activates torpedo mode of his helmet and then just destroys the bugs rather than becoming a part of them. So I just found it to be hilarious and coincidental and even satisfying, honestly, just like the action sequences. This ending was also quite satisfying, albeit quite hilarious too. And overall, I'll say, yeah, I did have a great time with the show. Completely worth the, I mean, I think it was worth the investment, in my opinion. I think it was. I think the show worked. It had a. I mean, the plot, in my opinion, might have been quite simple and standard, but it was still well executed, and at least had the sense of humor in the right place, at least for most of the part, and well, throughout the whole show. So that was my take on this show, The Peacemaker, which was played by John Cena. I think he was hilarious and great as Peacemaker in this show. So that's what all I had for this video. Tell me what you thought about this video and the show if you ever watched it. And until next time, see you next time. And here's a reference.